All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our January 2026 edition of the Inclusion and Wellbeing Forum. We are I believe we're in our 5th year of the forum now. So it's been going certainly the longest running free inclusion and wellbeing forum in the MENA region. We welcome you all today to join us. We ask that all mics be muted so that speakers can be heard. If you have any questions, you can pop it into the chat, and myself and Sherri will monitor. I will relay any questions that you have. You can pop them in there. I've added our social media tags in the chat as well, so if you want to follow any of us, you're more than welcome to do so. We'd like to perhaps listen to the presentation first, and then we can ask questions later. But if there's something pertinent in the middle, it's okay. You can ask, and I'll share it with us. We invite comments and sharing experiences. However, we do ask that confidentiality is maintained. Please don't mention any student names, any school names, but you feel free to talk about any cases in particular or challenges. We welcome industry experts as well. However, this is a free forum. It is not a marketing platform, so please, no promotion of products or services. As always, we will record the forum session and we'll post it on our YouTube channel, where you can find all of our previous recordings with experts from around the world speaking about lots of different topics all around inclusion, all free to access and share. And if you do access it, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Okay, I will, without further ado, pass you over to our expert speaker for today, Sherri Jenio, who is the founder of Edfluential. And today she's going to speak to us all about executive functioning and working with PODs in schools and implementing outstanding IEPs and a range of lots of different things. So Sherri, I'll let you share your screen and we can begin.
Okay, thank you. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Sherri Jenio, as she said, and I have been in the UAE for over 14 years. I started out as a teacher in the IB schools and then moved around to the American curriculum. And as I was in the schools as a teacher, in that time, there was no real inclusion. And then right before we received the bid for Special Olympics, then the Sheikh opened up that the schools will be carrying the inclusion departments. So that was a great experience around that time, to where being in the beginning to see how that has grown from 8 years ago, 9 years ago until now. It's remarkable how many schools we have and how much inclusion is now at the forefront of the industry. So I was able to cross over because my master's degree is in special education and my bachelor's degree is in behavioral and social sciences. So after I was in the schools, in the inclusion departments, COVID then took place, and I got to be a part of the online head of inclusion. I got to see how that affected our children. And then I was very appreciative to be able to move into the medical clinics for children in the region and work with psychologists and occupational therapists and speech therapists to see how they could support our inclusion departments. And I worked with a couple of clinics, and now I'm still working with a few consulting. But along that journey, I've been able to go through school inspections, and I've been able to present to different forums. And it's been actually enlightening to meet so many people in the inclusion world in Dubai. So with that, my presentation today is going to be about executive functioning and why this is so important for our inclusion teams to understand, along with our teachers, because our children, all of our children are affected by executive functioning. And it is definitely something that drives the way our students learn. And it's important for us to understand what this is. And it's definitely cognitive, and it's self-regulation that processes our independence, purposeful, goal-directed behavior. So what is so important about executive functioning is that this drives our children in the way they learn, the way they task initiate, the way they follow through, and their product of their goals at the end. So I think it's important that we understand exactly what that looks like, and it looks differently for each student. When we look at our inclusion departments and how our tier system, tier 1 or level 1 students, how they react in literacy and numeracy, and then our tier 2 or our level 2 goes all the way up to our level 3, tier 3 plus students. Everyone has a different learning outcome. And I think it's important that it's usually all driven, regardless of diagnosis, by our executive functioning. So it's the collection of the brain and the way it processes that guiding of our thoughts and our behavior. So our executive functioning takes place in our prefrontal cortex. And our prefrontal cortex is not developed, which is right here, until the age of 25. So what happens in that area of our executive functioning, when we are born, it actually develops and grows throughout time. So students that come into effect with a diagnosis, those areas can be delayed, where students that fall under our gifted and talented also become a part of the executive functioning, delaying, or sometimes they're accelerated in certain areas. So what's really important for that part of our brain is to have as much functional alignment. Sometimes we're heavily on our strengths and or heavy on our weaknesses. So what the jobs of teachers and executive and inclusion departments is to try to help these students to come up with strategies and techniques to get that balance. So what this prefrontal cortex and development of our executive functioning skills, this is what makes the definition and the definement of our students in their learning. So our executive functioning is obviously in the brain, and we have all these different areas. The activation area is our organization, prioritizing, and getting work going. Our focus is able to shift our attention, maintain that focus, and we see a lot of students that, especially at a young age, where that focus definitely has some weaker areas. Effort is alertness, being able to adjust our processing speed. A lot of students, depending on, again, diagnosis of their cognitive ability, will come into our processing speed if it's slower, if it's faster. Our emotions are another part of our executive functioning that play a huge part in our younger children. And then we level off, and then we get into the hormonal teen area where our emotions then go up and down. So we have ranges, and the biggest part of our executive functioning for our emotions are to try to get those regulated for our students. The memory is obviously a very, very important part of our executive functioning, and that's where we're holding and working with information and retrieving all of the information that we've received, either in our short term or our long term. Action is monitoring and regulating one's actions. Obviously, this is a part where we also produce our output of our goals. So on this slide, it shows our executive functioning skills. We have planning, which is the ability to figure out how to accomplish our goals. We have our organization, which is the ability to develop and maintain a system that keeps materials and plans clear for us. Time management is being able to accurately understand how long tasks take to complete. Task initiative is the ability to work independently and start those tasks when needed. Working memory is the mental process that allows us to hold that information. The attention is being able to focus. The metacognition is being aware of what you know and how to use that information. Self-control, the ability to regulate. Again, attention, the focus. Perseverance is the ability to stick through these tasks and not give up. Flexibility is able to adapt to new situations. These are our main executive functioning skills that we are born with, but again, depending on the way our prefrontal cortex develops and when we're storing these executive functionings, again, we have all of these different levels for our students. And knowing these different levels and how we as teachers and inclusion departments can react to each student is very, very vital, especially for our educational, independent educational plans for our students or our student learner profiles. In these areas of our executive functioning, we have three main types of areas that are extremely important. We have the working memory, which is where you hold all of that information, and then control, the ability to master the thoughts and the impulses so that you can resist these temptations, distractions, habits, and to pause to think before acting. This is something that we see very difficult in students that have ADHD or students that have autism, or even with our students that are in the gifted and talented, because their brains are racing so quickly that they could also have the control weaknesses. Cognitive flexibility, being able to switch gears and adjust to the challenging demands, priorities, or perspectives that are going on around them. Our executive functioning is built in our early years, and we begin to develop certain areas of strengths as we go along. So it's like a muscle, but it's your prefrontal cortex. So it's in your brain. And what it's doing is it's constantly evolving and developing. So in this area, we see peaks between ages 6 to 10. A lot of scientific research shows that our executive functioning skills are highly, highly encouraged and influenced in the year 3 to year 5. In American school system, that's grade 3, 4, 5. In the British, that's year 4, 5, 6. So those years are the really, really forming years of executive functioning. And it's the years of where we can start seeing students lag behind academically. And it's also there where we can see some of those students jump ahead in certain characteristics. So this is very important for us when we're regulating our MAP testing, our GLs, our CAT4s, where we can see the fluctuation of these executive functioning. And it doesn't mean that we can put these certain students in these categories without further testing, but it gives us an idea of where we need to watch for these students that, and obviously there's environmental challenges that come along. There's curriculum challenges where we have some students that come from, other countries that move here, and we're going from one curriculum to another curriculum. So all of these academic achievement milestones and evidences are very important, and it's very important for us to gather the data on these students before we are able to go in and say that they have the strength or the weakness in certain areas of our executive functioning. What is the importance? The children have the opportunities to develop executive function and self-related skills successfully in in society and for lifelong benefits. So this sets school academics and achievements. It works with positive behaviors, good health, and successful work and relationships. The reason that we focus on executive functioning in the educational world is so that along with those skills, it's parallel with literacy and numeracy. So when we are not able to regulate and to keep those executive functioning areas even, then it becomes blockers for us to receive the information academically. So it plays a lot on our receptive and expressive language skills. And it blocks, depending on our areas of weakness and our areas of strength, on how we receive that information in the classroom setting. Executive functioning challenges. Seen all of this. Trouble organizing with materials and work. You have students that lose or forget their materials, difficulty remembering multiple directions and tasks. Now, again, we don't want to, take just this alone and say that a student has weak executive functioning skills. But if you're seeing some of these areas for a student, then this is where we can set up IEP goals and student learner goals, even if they have not been pulled over into your inclusion department, and you're doing that data research on them to decide whether or not they need to go that route. These are some of the things that you could be looking for. Trouble completing tasks, difficulty initiating the tasks and activities, start tasks but may not finish, doesn't check to ensure that each step is completed. Trouble maintaining and managing time, lacks planning and problem solving and completing tasks and assignments, overestimate and underestimate time or needed tasks, difficulty breaking these tasks up. Emotional regulation, where we see a lot of outbursts, sudden frequent mood changes, unable to handle frustrating situations appropriately. Emotional regulation, difficulty recognizing and keeping track and effect of the behaviors of others. So what does this look like in an academic setting? Again, all these executive functioning categories. You're seeing all of these students behave in certain ways. When we look at executive functioning through literacy, and especially through reading, we're seeing that we pull up that working memory, that control, and that flexibility that we talked about earlier. In those areas of working memory, it's very difficult when you have executive functioning that has a barrier to be able to comprehend the meaning of the text and keep in mind of what they've already read. The other part is updating their understanding of the story as they continue to read. So when you're seeing students that fall under this working memory category and you're seeing these deficits, there may not necessarily be an area of a diagnosis, but their working memory could be being affected by executive functioning. Control, able to go through multiple meanings by choosing the correct meaning in the context of their story. Another is the flexibility. You'll see students that are unable to coordinate and switch between multiple mental processing during reading. Some literacy strategies that are easy to adapt and start with your students is organization, making sure that they have those to-do lists so that the student can check those assignments off. giving extra time in the beginning and at the end of class to write down those homework assignments, providing extra set of books to the student to take home, keeping a folder and a basket of supplies available. All of our teachers are already probably implementing a lot of this in their classroom as a whole, but being able to pinpoint when these weaknesses occur in certain students is able for you to be able to tag on certain areas of that executive functioning weakness. Time management, teaching the children to estimate that time for tasks, being able to set up, prioritize the importance of these assignments, and incorporating many deadlines along. Working memory, being able to use repeating information, tasking back and forth, paraphrasing information, giving a copy of clear notes for them to follow. Outsourcing working memory by annotating and highlighting the text. These are just some of the literacy strategies that you can incorporate in your classroom for these students for executive functioning. In writing, when we go through the working memory, the control and the flexibility, being able to see that when a student is writing, a lot of our teachers will immediately go into dyslexia, and not necessarily would be the area when we see the executive functioning skills having a weakness. Being in the working memory, keeping the topic or the goal of the paper in mind while writing. Helps remembering spelling and grammar rules. This is where we get the dyslexia misunderstanding for students with executive functioning. Control, brainstorming and planning process of writing. We see a lot of students that have weakness in task initiative. This is a very difficult area for them. Ideas that you've already covered with these students, but they're not able to grasp them. Flexibility, coming up with alternative ways of saying something. And the change of organization of an essay. You see that it's very difficult. So in these areas of writing, we come up with some assisted technology, the grammar and the checker of the software. We also see the text-to-speech being done with students so they can hear and read aloud with the writing and identify areas of improvement. We also see that by playing games with the student and doing the word language back and forth, again, this is the receptive and expressive language, using graphic organizers, teaching children to use mind maps, flow charts, plan and organize their writing before they begin. Now, what does that look like when we transfer executive functioning over to our IEPs or our student learner profiles? KHDA and ADDIC and all of the different governing, inspecting curriculum categories of the government are looking for your accommodations that you're doing. And what happens is when the inspectors come into the classroom, to be able to see progress from a student, that's the first thing that they're looking for throughout that whole entire time. Is your student, regardless of being tier 1, 2, 3, 3+, or if they're, level 1, 2, 3, are they making progress? This is up to you as the teacher to make sure that these accommodations pair with the diagnosis or the executive functioning area of weakness and their strengths areas. So some accommodations that you could put into your learner profile is pre-teaching, more detailed explanation, reminders to stay on task for that student, more time to finish assignments, and more opportunities to practice concepts during the learning. Multi-sensory approaches. Most of our students with executive functioning deficits We need to figure out if they're a visual learner, an auditory learner, or kinesthetic learner. So when we are able to see those strengths, and you could be all three across, but there's usually an area that we find in these students that are a little bit stronger. If we could figure out, and teachers are very, very keen to this, to be able to see what works with that student, then you're able to pull that multisensory approach in for that student, put it in accommodation, so that with the executive functioning skills area of the weakness, you can help close that deficit, and you can help the strategy and technique so the student can develop that area. Structure and routine is very, very important for students, so that during those executive functioning areas of weakness, that they are hearing the repetition, seeing the structure, and they can continue when they come into the classroom of doing the exact same thing. That helps them if they're weak in task initiative, or it will help them if they're in that organization pattern where they have that deficit. Break down tasks into smaller steps, visual aids with calendars, schedules, and lists. Okay, here's another area where you could put in your IEPs or your learner profiles. Making sure that the metacognitive and self-monitoring skills to help during executive functioning. You could set up setting goals, help clear goals for each class, and reflect on their progress. Self-assessments. You could have the student reflect on their own work and see how they're doing and what their perception of their strengths and areas for improvement. Having them do questioning, encourage them to ask questions and think critically about what they're learning. Keeping a journal, practicing self-reflection. These are other areas. Using graphic organizers. We moved away from these during COVID because we were online. Bringing these back as a visual aid for our students that have weaker executive functioning skills is very important, because bringing in mind maps for them and flow charts help them to do the sequential processing and keep things in order, while their mind, if they have, working memory areas that aren't as strong, and then that way they can keep up with their thought process or they can adapt to it. Here's another way that you could put goals into your executive functioning student skills. You can improve self-regulation. You can go in and you could do brain exercises during these sessions with them. And when we say therapy sessions, teachers can actually pull these away and do them as interventions. So you can have a small group in a small area of the room, and they could all be working on these together, and you could still be collecting your data to see where these areas for the student have the weakness or have the strength. You can have engaging tasks that require fine and gross motor skills and visual systems to follow instructions based on the task presented. With these small areas that you're monitoring, you will be able to have your data for when you're doing your testing scores to see why these students may not have achieved when you know their cognitive ability because of their CAT 4 is coming out high or advanced, or even at classroom expectation, but you're not able to quite get them to present the right score when they're testing. Then you're able to do some of these small goals in your classroom for individual students or groups of students so that you can figure out how you get them over that next threshold. It's very important for students that have executive functioning weakness areas is getting them to label their emotions and enhancing self-calm techniques and managing stress. When we take students that have weaknesses in executive functioning and we pull them into group exercises, knowing what their strength is very important, because then you can help build that self-confidence along the way. An example would be when you're pulling out small reading groups and you put 3 to 4 students together, making sure that you know what each student's strength is and their executive functioning, and tasking them with that role is going to be important, because you're going to be able to keep that impulse control under tabs, and you're also going to be able to accelerate that cognitive learning. You can develop impulse control decision-making skills while improving the ability to pause and think before acting during these minimal prompting sessions. So some of these areas, even though we're using them as therapy sessions, they can be used in the classroom to, again, get the data that you need. Visual strategies is showing them the emotional wheel charts, which your well-being teachers in the school have up all over, able to point the emotions out. Using the emotional word banks help with the self-regulation for students. Again, these students may not necessarily be tagged as a diagnosis for emotional regulation, but everyone goes through those situations when you have a weakness in your executive functioning and you're being brought in to actually try to achieve academically. So when you're doing literacy and you struggle with, again, like we showed before, the literacy part of reading, then these areas of being able to express that emotional vocabulary help them to bring in that self-regulation. Again, you're coming up with strategies and techniques in the classroom so that you can see the student make progress. Because in the end, during your school inspections, during your principal coming in and evaluating, they're wanting to see you make progress with the student without. And you're also teaching that student how to self-regulate. You're teaching that student to come up with strategies for task initiative, planning, organization along the way. And again, this goes with students with diagnoses and students without. Positive reinforcement systems, where you give that extra free time in class. Peer support, where you're putting those peers together so that you have the ones that can support in reading and you have other students that can support in writing. You have one student that's sitting there that can verbally express while the other student is auditory. So these are some of the things, this you can't see, but it's really important that you could go through a checklist with students, which is executive functioning skills questionnaire, and I'll make sure that everyone gets a copy, is going through and having the student, even the younger children that you sit down with, to go through and ask them these areas. And there are 3 questions, you know, do you feel like you, and for the older students, jump to conclusions? Do you feel that you think before you speak? You can word these for different age groups so that then you can find out how these students see themselves with their executive functioning skills. And then you can compare that with your classroom and what you're seeing with them before you then can gather the data to say they need to go further. And, you know, we need to explore some type of educational assessment with them, or where that you can say, okay, they're 2 years below on reading. Is this definitely a deficit in a certain category of dyslexia, or, you know, in math, dyscalculia, or is it an executive functioning skill block? And then we go through, and at the end, we score them, and our strengths are the highest scores and our weakness are the lowest scores. And then you can see what categories these children fall in. If they're low in planning, but they're high in time management, then you can set up structures around their developmental progress so that they can build on that and take that strength to overcompensate for the weakness. Flexibility, stress tolerance. You can see some of that. And when you really hone in and focus on these executive functioning skills, This is what helps teachers to be able to push these students forward for students of concern. And it's also where you can bring up your test scores in your own classroom. And if a student needs a little bit more time, then you can figure out how to prep them before so that they know that they've got 5-minute head start before the rest of the classroom, or they have a few minutes after the classroom. Now, obviously, we're not going past our accommodations, which go into where if they're not in the inclusion world, you wouldn't want to go past that. But you can do these little monitoring areas so that this can help you to move these students forward or to help close the gaps. So do we have any questions?
We have one question. So Vanshika was asking, what would the Cat4 scores look like for a gifted student who may actually be performing well, but struggling with executive functioning skills?
Interesting. So the Cat4 is the cognitive test that you're born with, your intelligence that doesn't change throughout your life. What changes is the strategies and the techniques that go along with that. So for a student on a Cat4, they would possibly, if they're scoring high, it means that they are hyper-focusing and they're able to go through the test and they're seeing it as a race. And so they're able to tick off and have that hyper-focusing. So it's the dopamine that's been released for them so that they could do that focusing. If you have a student that you know the cognitive ability is high, but they're scoring way below that, it could be that their task initiative is off, you know, or their stress management, which would be that self-regulation. They know a test is coming and it takes them 10, 15 minutes to get started. You can see that in students by observing. Every teacher has this skill set, right? You've been with these children long enough to where when you put something in front of them and watch the way they respond within the first 10 seconds, then you know if that's a task initiative issue, or you know with those students that come into the classroom and they're looking for a pencil and they're looking for their book and they're looking for their paper, you know, we're looking at definitely an organization issue. Now, if you are seeing that repeatedly along with other areas of executive functioning, then we could sit down and say, okay, these students of concern, it's valid. We're seeing that their planning is not there, their task initiative is not there. You know, other areas that you would be looking for to push them forward for some type of assessment.
Okay, that is the only question so far. Any other questions, guys? Does anyone want to ask anything in the chat, or you can speak? You can just open your mic and ask. No, it seems we had 56 people, so it must have been pretty comprehensive. No questions at all, which is really great. So we've covered pretty much everything, and it was really quite broad, and we're getting a lot of thumbs up and hearts and smiley faces. So thank you so much. So if anybody needs any support in their school, reach out to Sherri. She's available. She's doing some really amazing work. I know you're busy, but I'm sure it's always welcome to invite more people who need support. Equally, if anyone needs support in their school for inclusion development or learning support assistance, pop us a DM at Incluzun or me. I've shared our details in the chat. As I mentioned, we'll be sharing the recording in the next couple of days on our YouTube channel, and you can all access it there. And thank you everyone so much for joining us today. We hope to see you next month for our February Incluzun Forum. And I hope everyone has a wonderful new year. Thank you so much, Sherri, for a really great presentation. It was really informative.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks, everybody. Have a lovely evening and a lovely 2026, and good luck for the new term.